All right, so now it's time to talk about the, I guess maybe it's called the fence mount. And the fence itself obviously is a very simple piece. I have here, goes on the back to guide your wood along. You can adjust the fence, of course, to be on different degree angles, going up and down like so, and moving it back and forward to give yourself more space or less space to cut different sizes of wood. These pieces, so this, and a bunch of other hardware is involved with mounting it. This is another piece that I actually found was broken or not set up correctly when taking it apart. It actually took me a while to figure out how it should be used properly because of the way it was set up. So, a few things, just to go over the assembly. So this piece is a slider. It goes across here, and it'll move the bed to adjust it for smaller boards or thicker boards, etc., back and forth. Then you have this piece here, which mounts in like so, and I guess it's actually the carriage. Then this will mount on top of it, like this, and then it will use this component here to tighten it and lock it in place. And these three bolts here are for the fence to actually go across. So this, it holds the fence. This is the arm for the fence, and you can adjust it to be different angles, etc. Now, what was broken with this? So there's a few things that confused me, and I had to sit up for a while and think about how they're used. So one, this piece here, I had no idea what the hell this was for. It fits into this component like this, and it was stuck in there. So I had to pull it out, and even now it gets a little bit stuck. The easiest way I found is actually to move it. And it kind of occurred to me when I pulled it out this way, it slides really nice along there. And this is like a more soft metal, sort of like the brake components that I said were on the table lift, as well as the shims. So it's made out of the same metal. I think it's just this type of steel. It slides really nice though in between that groove. And then when I looked at this piece, it has these cylinders sticking out here. And I do believe that they mount perfectly to this. So what this is, this piece isn't supposed to be on here. On here. The piece is supposed to mount to this and act as a guide so that this follows it like a track. And then this hole here is just to lock it in place, not necessarily as a track, because it's quite floppy when it's in there. This gives it more of an accurate motion, or a path. The problem is these were sort of in. This must have popped out or got pulled off over time. So essentially I hammered them out more, and I will be comparing this and mounting this here. But for the sake of showing how this is assembled, I'm not going to do that in this video. I'll have it done when it's assembled. So another thing I found is, and I found this early on actually when taking the pieces apart, right here, the teeth of this, well, first let me explain this component. This slides on here, like so, and it would slide into this, so we go inside the groove and allow you to move up and down. And like I said, this is not supposed to rest on that, but it looks like it's chomped up the threads a bit. So the threads have definitely suffered at the hands of this in the past. There should be in my opinion, there should be a round pipe in between here that this could kind of rest on. Now, it's supposed to be resting on this piece, and maybe that was the issue, but I kind of think it's a design flaw to not have something wrapped around here. So I might put a piece of something that can move a little bit in between here, that if this nicks it, it won't wreck the threads anymore. I had to run it back and forth to clean it up. This bolt was really stuck on here, and I did electroplate this with nickel just so it wouldn't rust any further, but I did have to run it back and forth. And it's still a bit tight there. It doesn't actually need to go there though, because that is the part that's in between. So really that could be smooth for all I care, but I want to be able to get the bolt off if I need to, the nut. So another problem is this is bent. This piece is bent. The piece that goes through here is also bent. And I tried to think, is this intentional? The more I look at it, probably not. I can't think of a reason for it being bent. The fact that both are bent, this to me would take a lot more effort to bend than this, of course, but maybe it was dropped and hit like this because this is sticking up. So I thought about bending it back, but I don't have a torch, and that would be the proper way to do it, is to heat these and bend them back. And if I ever need to, I'll wreck the paint, but it won't be a big deal. It's just some basic black spray paint to repaint it, just to prevent the rust, because this thing was really rusted, this piece, and all the rust was inside here. So now it moves more freely. I cleaned it out, etc. All right, so basically this guy goes on here, this guy goes in here. Now in between this nut and this plate, you have this component here, and this makes me think of what would be on a like a skill saw, a circular saw blade to keep it in place. You've got this washer, like spring type washer here to press up against it, then a washer inside, and that just pushes it and locks it to hold it in the position it needs to be. And then of course that rides on this. So let's put it together. Oh wait, before that, actually maybe I'll talk about that after it's together. So first, what you need to do is screw this to that, and the way that this locks in is there's a grub screw and the flat spot. Now they actually had this screwed in all the way, and I'm forgetting to put the piece on first. I did do this a few times, but I'm obviously gonna screw it up a few times in between. So I will put this in place. Hopefully put this on camera. And I'm gonna try to get those, I don't have the piece affixed, but I'll try to get it in the proper grooves. So that it sits properly. Yep. So you do this, and then you start to screw this piece in with the nut all the way to the top. But the key here now is that you need to watch the threads coming through this section, and you need to get it to a flat. And then I need to unturn it a few times and then do it there. The thing is, they had it originally screwed in all the way up to the edge, and then they did down the grub screw here to hold it in place. The problem with that, and this made it a real pain to take apart, is that the bolt, or sorry, the nut, was so tight against it by default. It only had like one turn of motion to undo and redo it. So it would have been a real struggle to change the table in that case. Okay, so I've got the grub screw in place. And then the thing too is you can't really do this as one assembly while it's on here, which is a bit of a pain. Because of that bend, you can't twist this piece anymore, which is why I think it wasn't intentional. It must have dropped and knocked it. So, and as you can see, you can tighten this, and it'll eventually get it tight enough to not move. So it moves a bit here, and that's fine right now, but you wouldn't tighten this by hand, and you would need a wrench to do this. But what's kind of nice is the handle here is a wrench. So this just has the sockets built right into it. I 3D printed a knob for this because it was missing, but I'm going to 3D print a better one, maybe a bit of a longer and chunkier one. So this goes on here, and it locks right onto that, so you can loosen or tighten it however you want. And then there's a nut that goes on the end, and it also works both ways. This nut on the end pulls the assembly together to the carriage inside. So if you want it to move back and forth, you loosen this nut on the outside here. So you just loosen it, and then it can move, tighten it, locks it in place. And then if you want to move this one, you shift this over, and then you loosen this side, and then you can move this however you want, and then you can tighten it. Now this will be a lot easier once I have this guide in place, because it'll help it move consistently. Now, one other thing that did I tighten this too much? Yeah. One other thing that I haven't talked about is this weird little dongle on the back here. I just need to see if you can see it. Yeah, in the camera. Okay, so this little flap confused me. It was pushed inward, so it was flapping on the inside. Now you can't actually do that when it's in place here. Well, maybe it's making a liar out of me. It gets stuck at some point, but it was pushed all the way over, and it does have like a little the metal gets thicker at the top here to prevent it from moving that way, but they must have forced it inside. I didn't know what it was for. Like, it didn't seem to have any purpose in here. And then you have these grub screws, and there's 3 sections with these grub screws in here. I'll take this off. That'll be easier to show. Okay. Debating whether I stick the whole assembly part. So you've got these grub screws in here, and you can use your screwdriver through this hole to tighten it or loosen it and move it in and out. So what these are is they're presets for the angles you want. And what you do is you push this flap down, you can move it down, and boom, it'll sit on the preset, and then you tighten it, whatever, and you have another preset maybe higher up. So you move this out, move it to the next one, flap it over, and then you're good to go. So that's what it's for. And I had no idea while taking it apart, because I was like, what are these for? And I took them off, cleaned them up, but I was still wondering. And this piece also confused me. See, it's very hard to push in because it has a block right there to prevent it. But they had, I guess, pushed it hard enough that it was inside, and I had to hammer it back out. So it took effort. But yeah, that's what that's for. So there's presets, the lock mechanism, the wrench that comes with it, essentially, or the socket that comes with it. I also nickel plated this to prevent rust too. Some of it didn't get on there quite smooth, but I think it looks nice regardless. I'll be putting this channel in, or the guide for the channel to go on. And these bolts here are just for the actual vents to go in place. So I'll just set this all up off camera, and then I'll show you when the fence is actually on. All right, now that I've got the fence attached, just to show that mechanism assembled and working. I don't think I need to add lubrication here. I'm not sure, because you want these things to stay very rigid. If I do, it might be the slide, but it seems to slide quite nicely. So I don't think it'll need it. Maybe I'll do it in that channel. That channel definitely helps with the motion, getting that affixed properly, because before it was just flopping around. So, and it takes the pressure from this off the threads in here. So hopefully that'll make them better. I also put some brass winding inside there just to cover it. Maybe I'll 3D print something just to cover it in case I ever take it apart. It doesn't smash the threads any more than they're already smashed. But let's just see this this work. So I have them both loosened, so as you can see, it can move. I wanted it to get it to a right angle. I can use the little tab here, place it down on the grub screw that's behind here, and I can tighten this little screw and it'll move it slightly, and that could be my preset, right? I'd have to figure out how accurate that is when you're moving it back and forth. Will it actually become out of square, etc.? Eventually, I need to reaffix the dial that's on here. There's actually a angle dial here, which I've removed. I'll be putting all the logos and stuff on at the end. So now if I tighten this, well, first I think you should tighten the slide before you do adjustments here. That just seems to be, it creates the stability you need, right? So obviously you can slide this back and forth now. Then you tighten the slide, now it won't slide. And then you tighten this. And this sticks a little bit. This was actually, I didn't show it, but this was dropped too, so there's a bit of a dent in it, which makes the socket a little bit tight sometimes. Now in the previous video, or the previous clip, I showed this little cap washer with a spring type washer and then another flat washer in there. I had them in the wrong order, so obviously it's the cap, the spring, then the flat washer that should go on there. So yeah, now that's locked in place, and that's how it works. I'm actually really happy I found out about these fine adjustments that you can do here. I think that'll be useful for presets in the future if I want preset angles, or to do fine adjustments just slowly without having to handle it, you know, because this thing's quite heavy. So it's a nice feature to find out existed instead of just throwing it together and not fully understanding it. So that's one advantage of taking things apart to understand them. All right, one of the main attractions, the blades. So this is the blade mount, the spinning head, the part that you do not want to get your hand in when it's running. It required just basic sanding, cleanup. Some of the gunk on here was mainly just built up sawdust, so it wasn't a crazy amount of rust. It just had surface rust on it. I cleaned that up. I did not take the ends off with the bearings. The bearings seem okay. If they do have a problem, I will have to get a bearing extractor. That's why I didn't take it apart. I didn't want to break them or wreck them in any way because I don't have the tools to fix it, essentially. But if I do find a need for that, I will go about getting the proper tools to take that apart. Yeah, so cleaning that up, cleaning the I guess they're not mounts, locks They're what keep the blade in place. Cleaning them up too, again, mostly sawdust built up, a little bit of rust here and there. The bolts were fine, but I spray painted them anyways. Here is the, the pulley with its key. That'll go on the end. So the pulley sticks at the back and the motor is down on the back. So from a safety standpoint, you're away from the belt, but the belt's exposed on this one. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when I show off the motor, but essentially this doesn't have a belt guard, and it doesn't even have a blade guard, which I'm going to have to replace probably after I assemble it and whatnot. Either I'm going to make one or see if my dad can find the old one in the garage somewhere. So basically, the blades. Here are the original blades it came with, and here is a cheap $20-something one I bought on Amazon. Not each, for 3 of course. And you can see the old blades, they do have Rockwell on them. I'm not sure if these are the original blades, but of course they're branded. I bet they're the original, and they're pretty marked up. They definitely needed to be replaced. This one actually is the better of the 3. This one I think is the worst. It's got 3 marks on it. This one has 1 big mark in the center. So I didn't clean them up because I'm not going to use them. I'm going to buy these cheaper ones, and if I use this machine enough, I'll splurge on some more expensive good ones. But for now, going with the cheap option just to get it working, and within my budget. So if you've watched any jointer videos or you have one, of course you know how this works. This goes into the slot. The blade goes on top, like so, and then you loosen the bolts, so you push them out in order to clamp it in place. It pushes up against the wall. So nothing too fancy there. The only thing I would warn about is your wrench. So that's a very tight space, at least on these old ones. I don't know if the newer ones have more spacious gaps, but these old ones, or this one in particular, is very thin. So people recommend it bike wrenches, and maybe they work better because they're thinner. I was cheap, and I've never actually used this 5/16, so I just filed it down quite a bit. So here's my new wrench with thinner profile. So it does fit in, not perfectly. I could probably still take a few passes off this, but I do have a 3D printer one somewhere around here. I moved it, but it was for adjusting the tightness of wheels on 3D printed motion systems, and it was thin, but it's a metric, and therefore it kind of rides over the bolts a bit. But what I did is I used it to just initially do it because it was thinner than this, and then when it got to the tight spot, I used this to finish it off. Again, there's nothing too much to this yet until I start leveling or making sure the beds are aligned with these blades. One other thing, compared to some newer jointers, there are no grub screw adjustments here for the height difference in the sides. So if this doesn't sit flat, I would probably have to shim it. So if the blade is, I guess if it doesn't come manufactured the right size, you'd have to shim it. If every blade is off, that would obviously mean where it's sitting is off, and I would have to shim inside where it sits. And it just sits inside these half circle areas here, these recesses, and you just stick it in. So let me try to get it in there, hopefully without cutting myself. Let's see. Push it back. There. It just sits there, and if I move it in properly, it spins like so. These bolts go up from below, so you need to put these on before you put it on the table, because the table will cover these up. I think you can loosen it while the table's on there and probably take this off because there's a gap underneath. I don't think you can see that on camera, but there is a gap underneath here. So maybe you can loosen these when it's on the bed, but I would rather do it with a socket, and it'll be quicker. So I'll do it before I put it onto the bed. And I don't think there's much more to it than that. I get the blades in there. I'll make sure it's level with it.